So tonight, I'm Dave Cope, Poet Laureate of Grand Rapids, blah, blah, blah. Um, it's a nice platform to get some things done, I guess is what I'd say. Welcome. Tonight we have the first three readers in the conference series, and I'm really pleased to start with these three because they are all very old friends. We've needled each other in the ribs and giggled together for decades in some cases. And it's a pleasure because I won't have to do the usual academic thing, which I probably won't do anyway. So we'll start at the beginning. Kim Weingarten, who is a longtime professor here at the college teaching creative writing. I'll just kind of give you a take on, I edited the anthology of Grand Rapids Poets, which we're going to publish, Song of the Awashtenong. And when Kim sent me her stuff, it was really interesting as a manuscript, because a lot of times people send a greatest hits, or they will send poems that move them right now, or something like that, and it becomes sort of a discrete series, as they would call it. But when I looked at Kim's stuff, it was almost as though there was a journey going on. Each poem stood by itself, but I got a feeling of a vision that was moving all the time, and that in order to get a picture as to what it was, you had to see the whole thing, if that makes sense. And I've always loved that in poets, when they can be both, each poem stands by itself, but it also is part of another thing, which is a kind of journey which cannot be reduced to narrative, if that makes sense to everybody. Yeah, it's what they used to call, oh God, word escapes me now, so we'll skip it. It's one of those academic terms. So without further ado, Kim, it's all yours.
Well, it is April, and April is National Poetry Month, and it's good to see a number of you here, and I want to especially thank my students for coming, because they're juggling between research papers and final projects and so forth, so thank you for taking the time to come. The first poem that I'm going to read is called A Cold War in 4 frames, and I want to give you a little bit of background information or a footnote to the poem. In 1990, South Ossetians declared independence from Georgia. They called themselves the Republic of South Ossetia. The Georgian government responded by abolishing South Ossetia's autonomy and trying to take the region by force. And the poem is A Cold War in 4 frames. 1. A shoe from a pile gathered for the displaced outside a building marked with a red cross fits the right foot of the little girl from South Ossetia who can't find her mother in this food line divided by soldiers and tanks in the embers of this 5-day war. 2. A woman dressed in white at the front of the line ladles milk made from powder into metal cups and looks into the face of each person she serves as if to say, "This milk will sustain you, will carry you back to your home, your family, your people," most of whom no longer warm their bodies with beating hearts, but lie blood belly up, faces to the sun, and eyes open to wait for a proper burial. 3. A soldier halters up his gun in the sling on his shoulder and takes pleasure in the way fate motions his finger on the trigger and sinks the posture of the people who would still be proud, except they have seen the tear of flesh and the explosion of windows, the distance a wall will shatter less than a second after the grenade launcher splits a bright morning. 4. A wind blows hard and cold tonight, flaps the side of a makeshift tent of men's work shirts, bed sheets, and a woman's skirt. The spirit of the girl's mother wanes and appears, then floats through the doorway of the tent and settles above the dirt floor. If she listens quietly, She will hear the voice of a cricket and the hum of a sad lullaby, revived by a little girl wrapped in memory, beautiful and affirming. To wake to distance. He stalls the old pickup in the gravel lot of the nursing home. Tires spit stones in parallel lines that follow him onto the highway, 2 lines that will never meet again in earthly time. He is so relieved to leave her, his wife who no longer recognizes him, though they have shared the same bed and worked the same orchard, his wide hip to her slight hip for almost 50 years. On the highway, relief becomes grief while he watches overhead the V formation of geese heading south for the winter. He rolls down the window to take in a full cleansing breath of air, the heartbeat under his denim shirt going wild. He knows his feet and hands all of his life working the earth, that his mind is beyond understanding where she has gone in her own complicated map of the brain. When he pulls into the drive of their farmhouse, a cold wind rushes under the truck. He does not have to read the almanac to know that winter will come early and alone this year. He feels no hurry to go into the house, the oily light of the windows peering back at him. It has been months since she was there at the kitchen table, her smile lifting him lightly into the bliss of quiet evening, the orchard behind them framing their entire history together, and savings now spent on a room, and nurses who call her by a name she is sure belongs to the woman in the chair next to her. When he goes to sleep at night, sadness pulls the covers up tight around his neck, a sadness that leaves him wondering who she will think he is tomorrow after he has opened his eyes to the empty space in their bed. The next poem that I'm going to read is called Master and Man. It's the most recent poem that I've written, and I've flipped the roles in this poem. The dog has become the kind master of the man. It's called Master and Man. The dog pulls on his mucklucks and red stocking cap and gathers with a dexterous paw the expandable lead at the front door to take the gray-bearded man for a walk. Outside, snow falls. The sun sets early on these lonely winter eves. A single strand of Christmas lights glazes the front window of the only other house left on the block. At Russo's pond, the old man sniffs at a yellow circle in the snow, pulls at the lead and lifts his leg to pee under sickle-shaped stars. The dog noses the man's hand as if to say, yes, that's it, good boy. Crossing the street to the lumber yard, windows dark and spotted with sawdust, the old man's ears perk, his swanky rump swags back and forth when he smells the scent of a skunk and runs for the tail as it closes in the lens of a woodpile. Such is their routine every evening about the time when the old man misses the woman who brought him tea after dinner, read the comics aloud when his eyes began to see clouds on every horizon. Before turning to go back inside, the master pauses with the man. Together, they look up at the moon, and a howl and a bark breaks out, the sound of sleigh bells. Many of the poems that I write are persona poems, and this is a good example of a persona poem. It's called Husks, and it's written from the point of view of a young adolescent boy trying to come to terms with what's happened in our economy with so much unemployment and foreclosures, families that have to separate and move apart in order to get jobs. And the poem is in the form of a letter that he sends to his father. It's called Husks. Nothing new to report today. Sun blazes crops in the fields curled into husks, and that dumb dog up the road was killed while running alongside Miller's truck. I tried phoning you to say there's nothing new happening here. The woman on the other end said you were loading a semi for a delivery to Houston. Lucy's dad lost his job. We were expecting that. You quit before they could let you go. That's how I understand it. Dad, I see the red-winged blackbird on the fence post. He comes every day in the late afternoon, an anecdote to the hum of Wilfred's tractor. I've managed to get a ride to school with a neighbor next door. That's news, I suppose. Mother worries less about gas prices, and I'm coming home at the end of the school day with a sack dinner, an apple, a cheese sandwich, and a juice box. I miss you. Grandma's glad you found work, and Mom says you've started talking again in short sentences, saying words like maybe and we'll see. Let me know when you'll be home for a visit. I'll have the yard mowed this time. I've mended the cracked window in the garage with tape. It no longer rattles when strong winds blow in from the fields. The next poem I'm going to read is called "The Summer Without Rain." And I always date my poems, and this poem was written in August of 2007, and it was a summer without rain. I remember setting the sprinkler not so much to water the grass, but to water the birds. And it was not more than 5 minutes or so of having the front sprinkler on when the sparrows would descend, and I'm not exaggerating or even lying here, but they would line up in a row in front of a bowl in the concrete that had filled with water from the sprinkler, and they would drink. And I thought those birds are more civilized than most human beings. It's called "The Summer Without Rain." In a heat that keeps children indoors and the yellow cat lays under the spirea, the sparrow follows the grace arc of the lawn sprinkler all summer into the puddle made just deep enough inside a circle of cracked concrete on the sizzling sidewalk outside my front door. A family of sparrows follows. They line up, one small bird behind the other, without a bully in the flock for their dip in the bowl of water. Wings fanned and flashing, a bargain that the heat of summer will not singe their flight. I watch this semblance of order made more solemn by the shared relief that often comes with water, while a clan of farmers just miles from here stand like stalks in a cornfield of dried and cracked furrows in the summer without rain. Blue River of Contagion. Blame it on migrating wildfowl who carry the virus over waterways and drop dead the sparrow at my foot at the sidewalk's edge, its ruffled feathers swept round into the size of a child's earmuff, the rhythm and syntax of my morning walk now stilted by caution. Blame the cat who strains and paws at the yellow-bellied bird under the swing on a playground and carries girdled round his teeth the virus home to a child waiting at the door. At night, her precise dreams of swings and the merry-go-round rush into a howling of abstractions. Widespread mutation drifts from one bird species to the next, and the farmer in Laos, his investments in a flock of chickens, need of clothing and food for his children, is obliterated in days in the feces-sullied narrowness of a coop. This blue river of contagion flung wide in the muzzy morning light of another day leaves me dizzy and sliced like the epidemic of blame and greed, ever accusing the other in a world spiraling closer into an absence of poetry. I enjoy traveling, and I try every year or two to plan a extensive trip, and I always carry a small travel journal with me when I go and take notes along the way, having faith that eventually they will find their place in a poem. And this poem is called Porto Grande, Cape Verde Islands. And Porto Grande is one of the main islands in the Cape Verde Islands. It's located about 400 miles off the western coast of Africa. In the town of São Vicente, protruding ribs of stray dogs number the long history of hunger on this island, where only the acacia tree is green. Narrow roads wind up miles of volcanic ledges through a lunar landscape past a stucco house partially built, while inside the heat mystifies crying children who long for a taste of fish. At the end of the road, beaches of black sand and vacant timeshares remind me of a ghost town in a movie I once saw. The main character, led by a mirage, crawled his way through dust into ash and death. Some of the men on this island sell shells on a string for a bottle of grog, the drink that numbs their senses and eats their organs alive. In the late afternoon, they're women with smooth, dark skin and hair that reflects the rotating sun, wind and turn and hustle their bruised bodies and a capricious tourist between the alley and the market front. Still, there is beauty on this island without rain. In the way a discarded plastic bag skips along a deserted soccer field of sand and catches onto the goalie net strung with fish line. How it swells to the music coming from a transistor radio and the dance movements of an old couple who know the solace of hard labor and the ready comfort in a meager serving of corn and beans on a plate pieced together by their own joined hands. As David mentioned, I teach creative writing here at the college, and I try to talk with my students about the relationship between form and content, and I tell them form is content, content is form. The content of your poem can be, reinforced. The content of your poem can be reinforced by the form your poem takes. And this next poem is called The War Widow, and it's written in a series of couplets, and then the final couplet it's not a couplet, it's just a single line indicative of what's happened to the marriage between these two people, and it's called The War Widow. She knows by his body posture that he's getting ready to tell the story. The landmine his comrade lost his legs to, sizzling and charred, the crackling that came before the explosion, the echoing in the eardrum. She has endured this telling over and over, first in a letter, then on the ride home after his plane landed, his tour expired. But it is never over. The way even the most delicate hand can clench and make a fist, his telling broods into evening meals, a walk with their daughter, while pulling weeds in the vegetable garden under what he thinks is an afternoon artillery raid. How swift the transition from tomatoes to mortar, from changing the oil in the car to a swift body roll for cover. Even the dog moves in wide circles around him. Now he's left her and his boots pattern in the snow, a frenzied run from the house along the frozen pond, the tail of his scarf sweeping a trail between the footprints of two worlds, his, hers. Then still as the snow falling just before the woods he turns, thinning into broken branches like bones under the tops of whirling trees, and she closes the curtains, the window cold as a gold ring. The next couple poems that I'm going to read grew out of in 2008, I had a Fulbright to travel through Russia with about 18 other academics from around the world. And I had done some reading about the siege of Leningrad, but until I really got to St. Petersburg, which was called Leningrad then, it was actually being there that I was able to put some pieces together of history. And I think for many of us, when we study history in elementary school, it often is less than exciting. But to be able to travel and to be able to put pieces in place, people in place against that historical backdrop, I find that to be pretty exciting. And during the Nazi siege of Leningrad, which took place between 1941 and 43, the city was entirely cut off from the rest of the world. And the siege was one of the most gruesome episodes of World War II. Nearly 3 million people endured it, and just under half of them died, starving, freezing to death, most in the 6 months between October of 41 and April of 42, when the temperature was often 30 degrees below zero. And this poem is called Setting the Table, Leningrad, 1941. There's a reference to Nevsky Prospect in this poem, and Nevsky Prospect cuts right down the middle of St. Petersburg and runs from one end of the city to the other end. Setting the Table, Leningrad, 1941. The father traded the old black radio for a single remaining brown egg, and from grain hidden in the cupboard, the mother spun batter for a pancake for the girl's birthday breakfast. The family never heard Shostakovich speak on the radio about his Seventh Symphony, how life in Leningrad was going on as usual, even though leaves fell between the dark contours of barricades, and a young boy walked along Nevsky Prospect, 2 gas masks over his shoulder and his dog in his arms. To seize the rhythm of a normal day, the mother turned a single plate into a festive table in honor of her daughter's birthday. A china plate, wrens in bold blue and gold and yellow too, outlined the glistening edges of the pancake, while the samovar sat cold. No tea, the soup last night was broth, no salt, no bread to dip. Months later, a crow will wander onto the roof of an empty apartment building, tip its head and scare away from the reflection in a broken window, bold blue, gold, yellow too. It will fasten itself to a high branch when the bombs and shells strike Hitler's target, and it will wait for the grilled corpses balanced on winter snows, necks, legs exposed on sidewalks, long white tables without a centerpiece. This next poem is called Mother Russia, and it's about an exchange I had with a babushka, and well, I'll just go ahead and read it. It's called Mother Russia. Today, 1 year later, babushka, I fill the bird feeder in memory of you. I cut slips of lilies of the valley and snowdrops from the garden and tie this glimpse of spring together with a string in a vase given to me by my own grandmother. This, too, I do in memory of you, babushka. You stood outside the subway station on Nevsky Prospect in a torn sweater and held out to me a plea to buy a breath of a bouquet tied with a shoestring from your work boot. No hand gesture could explain to you the flowers would fade with me traveling on an overnight train to Moscow to visit children in an orphanage whose parents drank away the bread, the cabbage soup, and the mattress. In place of the flowers, I bought birdseed from you, wrapped inside the toe of an old sock. And all of Russia as I would not want to remember her, I saw in your face and hands, babushka, your gray gums and missing finger, and the dark waters of a St. Petersburg canal rolling back at me in the shutter of your eye. There's summer ahead, babushka. You will gather berries from a pail to cup in your hand for change from a tourist waiting for the subway. And I will think of you while I watch squirrels maneuver their way up the pole to the feeder, pillage seed, and scatter birds without a fight. This next poem is called Orphanage 40, and that same summer that I traveled throughout Russia on a Fulbright, we spent a couple days in Moscow and then drove almost 2 hours outside of the city, and I wondered, we were on our way to visit an orphanage, and the eeriness of that orphanage being so far removed from any kind of civilization certainly stayed with me, but more profound were the conditions that I saw these children were in. And this is a poem about their eating. It's called Orphanage 40. A kind of slant, the way a bowl and a spoon and tiny fingers will tilt the bottom of the round center to a small mouth for the last of the watery cabbage soup. If she can hold on to lick the spoon from top to bottom, the bowl from the rim down, before another pair of dirty hands snatches in an odd dance to taste the salt on these tools of civility, it will be a good day. And I'll read just one more poem. I was part of a program in the church that I attended. It's called the Stephen Ministry Program, and they train lay people to be paired up with someone in the congregation who's going through, it could be divorce, it could be illness, it could be facing death. And one of the couples that I worked with, the man was fading very fast, and he came home one afternoon when I was visiting with a wife, and he was completely just distressed. He had gone to the store to find a jar of pickle relish, and they had moved it. And for us, you know how traumatic it can be when we go to the grocery store and the object's been moved. And imagine not having the best of sight or the best of hearing, and how that might be very upsetting to an elderly person. It's called the Aaron. They've moved the pickle relish again. He's too proud to ask for help and steps sideways along aisles with ethnic food, past pasta shaped like question marks, and feels the same confusion he felt during the war when gunfire shocked his boots off his feet and blew his buddy over a rack of tree limbs, the skin of him stretched out on a branch. It was almost dark then, night, and he thought he was running away from the enemy. Then a piercing red flash and a hot burn to his knee sent him low to the ground and crawling back the way he had come. Now he doubles back through the store, still looking for the jars that must have disappeared or are out of stock. He turns away from the faces that look like they want to help him. He lifts his feet a little higher as if to say, I am not old, foolish, forgotten. He places a green pepper in his cart, something to ward off the young, scrappy fellow in an apron who's on to him that he is lost, confused under fluorescent lights and Christmas music, and moving toward a force more powerful than any fire. Thank you.
No, this is something we got to get remedied next time. Get my stuff over here. We'll be right back. I think I got to know Gary about the time when Fred Zabolski was doing Endgame, Beckett's play here in town and making quite a stir in the press and elsewhere. Gary has a kind of absurdist quality about his writing, but at times it comes in a variety of ways that are very sensible at the same time. I want to read you his biographical note. He's a byproduct of the nuclear age. He attended Catholic elementary school, during which period one nun was moved to comment, "I'll be surprised if he lives to be 10." Korreck later attended public high school, where between times either hiding in his locker or being suspended by his belt loops in same, discovered poetry. He had the privilege of attending Grand Rapids Junior College, which is us, Thomas Jefferson College at Grand Valley, and Michigan State University, from which he received a degree in journalism. His style is elegiac, which I think is really very pointed. His references range from Rumi, Rilke, Pound, and Eliot to Szymborska, Chakal, Celan, and Ritsos. Please welcome Gary Korreck.
Well, it's pretty exciting for me to get up and perform. I don't even know how to play the air guitar, so this is excitement. First poem, I want to loosen up a little bit. So this is about the concept of celebrity, and I think you'll recognize who it is right away. The poem's titled Free Paris. Just one small bit of background. Paris Hilton was unjustly imprisoned for about 2 days a while back, so that's where the Free Paris comes from. Stop the presses, the airwaves, the world from spinning. There is meanness, Mommy. Here everyone is so mean, Mommy. Unfair, it is unfair. All this legal stuff gets tangled in my hair. Where is my stylist, my shoes, my cell? My God, there must be something happening tonight. So bored with all this reckless pointing. And Mommy there snapping at me. And that man in black, ew, not in style. Can you make him stop? Unfair, just so unfair. Now I can't go shopping anywhere. There is no reason for me to be treated like a clerk in stores I never go to. Oh, Mommy, unfair, unfair, unfair. No one seems to care that I am suffering so. A day or two of life discarded. Like yesterday's dress, like a dull party, like a moment that never arrived. And here I just sit and sit. So unfair, it is just so unfair. The guards are mean and talk like Cher. I did nothing so wrong to deserve this. Even Jesus got to be outside. My God, stop this dream from dreaming, Mommy. So unfair, so unfair. Like callous servants touching vintage dinnerware. Who thinks it does not matter that I must fly through, wingless and without purpose, through porcelain skies, foreign airports, endless red carpets where, oh, so delicately I pause, and smile at no one, the smile no one deserves. Stop, unfair, unfair, treated like some out-of-work au pair, deprived of privilege rightly mine, these 3 days long enough to show the world what suffering truly is, Mommy. Unfair, it is truly unfair. I need a window. I need central air. I need a dress. I need some bling. I need my picture taken. I am ready to smile the smile no one deserves. Fan the flame of fame. Leave the minions crying for more, for justice or whatever. Oh, Mommy, it is so unfair, unfair, unfair. And OMG, with such a lack of flair. This one's called Eagle Harbor. It's the Upper Peninsula, a tiny town. I think there's about 6 people living in it. So I went there with some friends and doubled the population. The highway in illusion. It is history we are following to this place. Rock formed of fire, water reconnecting the sky. There is no rush, but the falls at Eagle River. Water on stone, a symphony of remaking. The architecture of a hidden landscape. We stand below, feel what we cannot see. This is all of time, easing like a leaf unto water, into and out of shadows, passing out of view into descending light. For a moment, we pause, accept the silence, submissive to time and place, as history we become, pushing onward toward the edge. I'm a huge baseball fan. This is a poem about someone who even I couldn't remember his name, hence the title, Watching What's His Name, His Last Time Up. There's an epigram, which I also like. It's from Camus. An indescribable universe in which a man allows himself the tormenting luxury of fishing in a bathtub, knowing nothing will come of it. Watching the fading, haired catcher slouch to the plate for his last time on television, he carries ashen wood, chest heaving with 16 seasons, cap raised in hand to wipe evening from his brow. Lights hide the furrows under his eyes, hitching his belt, squinting at the gum-chewing rookie pitcher, shouldering his bat as if it were a girder, hands sticky, neck and shoulders tight, a strain to remember, the long, dry seasons, the bus rides to places barely found on a map, Durham, Rocky Mount, Mars Hill, Aberdeen City, cold eggs, gray hash browns, greasy coffee, a legacy spent in the darkest part of summer's garden. Now digging in, spikes in dirt feeling strangely like quicksand before the yawns of children, popping cups, waiting for foul balls. The first pitch explodes, small, defiant. He backs away, a strike. The weight of the stadium on his bat, second pitch, hard swing, a crack, stings his shoulders, strike two. He steps out, surveys the right field seats. Ruth called his shot once. Ruth, that superhuman figure to chase with booted grounders, lost fly balls, wild throws, a ticket home. The third pitch, too soon. Like all of his 37 years, he swings. A dull thud, wood on horsehide, a weak grounder to short. He runs, his last chance out, just catching sight of the ball sailing over the first baseman's head. He tries for second, heart in front of him, breath hard, cold, eyes blurred and burning, legs stiff, diving head first into dust. Lying in the shadows, fingers inches from second, sweat playing on his face, cool evening presses down. He rolls to his side, rises beneath the roar of an overhead plane. There was an incident in Mumbai a few years ago where a hotel was bombed, and I don't think anyone's figured out who's done it yet, although lots of people claim to have done it. This is called walking in Mumbai. A father on his way to market, a small girl late for dinner, a merchant closing his shop. They are fragments of a moment, lost even to us as we study the residue. Consider the meaning of living too close, of walking in Mumbai. Soldiers enter the buildings. We have been told this is a terrorist act, claimed by no one in particular. We are told some have been killed or captured. Eyewitnesses describe the horror. The body counts rise. Numbers crawl across the bottom of the screen. He had forgotten what he was supposed to purchase. She had been playing with a stray dog. He was tired and business had been slow. Life does not pause for grief. We carry it with us, photographs already aged, faces no one remembers, flakes of ash in an amber sky, unseen by us and by other passers-by, walking in Mumbai. This is called A Christmas Carol for Jeddah Damour. He was a greeter at Walmart on Black Friday, and at 5 a.m. a bunch of the customers stormed through the doors. They couldn't wait. We wish you a Walmart Christmas, his smile says for just a moment. A willing greeter until the doors burst open. A holiday explodes, his brain a portrait of feet, memory an oven overflowing with silver and gold, stars bursting, grandmas with hooves, too close, falling prices everywhere. Let nothing you dismay. The exact cause of death has not been determined, nor the exact reason for turning customers away, some who have waited nearly a full day for a running start at Christmas. Onward, Christmas soldiers, shopping as to war. Hold firm to what is yours. Above the shouts, the loudspeakers, none shall be saved who do not take the direct path. God rest ye merry, gentle man, whose name does not resonate with the crowd. None who know it or will proclaim it. His mother will hear the news on television. We three kings and then some, whose collective mouths salivate in search of a distant sign, a guiding light set at 50% off, a 50-inch plasma HD TV for $798, a compact upright vacuum for $28, a 10.2 megapixel digital camera for $69, popular DVDs for as little as $9. Oh, 'tis the season to be jolly. Let all acquaintance be forgot at this suddenly quiet moment. Someone is removed from the entryway. Sorry, they lose out. Let the rest of us go on. We've waited nearly a day for a big screen plasma fix, a box set DVD, falling prices everywhere. This is a poem about a friend of mine took a photograph of a statue of Pushkin in St. Petersburg, and there was a pigeon resting on his hand. In this photograph, time is suspended. Each becomes the other, at once stationary, yet prepared for flight. The arc of poetry balanced on an outstretched hand, a gesture extended to the simplest of creatures, yet one aware enough to consider a view of the world words can never adequately describe. The sky slate and sunless, the master's tongue silent, his gaze distant, the visitor perched on his thumb, nuanced in shades of gray, yet nothing lost in translation. Fellow exiles, they share a common idiom, beyond the limits of place, alive eternally in the power of the moment. Another baseball poem. People my age will remember this person. Other people might too. There was a pitcher named Mark Fidrich who played for the Tigers for a couple of years. His nickname was the Bird, after Big Bird. This is in memoriam. A toast to the unkempt God, this fragment of neon plucked from the eye of a star, a solitary burst across the heart of a blue summer, who tended clay and gravel, owned the green afternoons and smoky nights, refused to age before our eyes, flew too high too quickly. Yet as quickly as he rose, his flame the quicker spent, and yet he saw what few can see, still smiling on his descent. This is a poem that's called Summer in the City. A couple of years ago, a young man went on a rampage in Grand Rapids and killed 8 people. Warm sun on pavement, children playing in the streets. Behind broad shades, a storm no one hears. Death slithers from place to place. A dark whisper echoes through the trees. Despair, the fuel of rage, a body without presence, the absence of touch. The day plays itself out, an elongated sigh from empty faces in need of one last shot at life. 8 dead, a city left to mourn its living. Hands search the broken night, hungry for something to love again. This is a poem called Camping in Autumn. It begins with a list, this art of doing much for the purpose of doing less. There must be food for an extra day, good twine, a sharp knife, a clean hatchet, plenty of matches, coffee, spare batteries. Everyone must have a light. It is a ritual of small tasks. Gather wood, set out food, stoke the fire, put on water, clean the tent, shake out the sleeping bags, clean the dishes. Everyone must have a light. No telephones, no television, no email. a peace that prevails, like a blanket being drawn over the body on a cold night. This is a poem about a woman. I didn't meet her exactly. It was an Indian restaurant in Florida. I go to spring training each year. And while we were dining, this woman came through in a pink outfit with something kind of like a negligee, and danced and rubbed everybody on the head. And she had a card that said the art of silk, defining what she did. So this is the art of silk. In the crowded Middle Eastern restaurant, where the buffet may be had for $9.95 plus a drink, past the steaming food trays, above the aroma of gently seasoned meats and vegetables, beyond the subtle color of plastic daffodils dusty in wine carafes, amid the tables of diners, arms raised, a smile simply worn, Dolores Runyon of Cleveland, Ohio becomes Samira. She moves as shadow, trailing a pink scarf behind her. Exotic one with dimpled belly and dimpled memories. Samira of 27 years in Florida, from realty company secretary to waitress, to the dream of men who dream of Samiras, and women who dare not dream. Samira who glides between the tables, trailing a pink scarf behind her. Samira whose hair is barely blonde, eyes too deep to be naturally blue. Samira whose smile belies little, trailing a pink scarf behind her. Samira of the symboled fingers and ringed toes. Samira who runs her own show. Samira, the attraction of the smoky downtown cafe. Samira, queen of meats and vegetables. Samira who wishes for more and less simultaneously. Samira as young as she can imagine. She glides between the tables, arms raised, smile intact, trailing a pink scarf behind her. This is a poem about, I think you can probably figure out what's going on, but just in case, it's dealing with Alzheimer's. It's called Strangers in the Doorway. Two people stand in the doorway of the Alzheimer's ward, their eyes fixed on those who have become strangers to them. He sees a woman who no longer remembers his touch, the stories behind the book of photographs he carries, nor the photographs, whose meaning will not outlive her. She studies a man who once swept her in his arms, who no longer shares her embrace, no longer acknowledges the brush of her cheek against his, no longer knows that she was once his own, alone. Today, these two, lost to everyone else, find each other. As if for the first time, their eyes lock in recognition of what it means to have someone, however lost. In their hearts, they still know those things without touch lose their meaning. They turn with hands held toward the pair in the doorway. They smile as one might smile at passing tourists, return to each other. One in the doorway turns to the other and says, "Let them go. They are happy." The other nods. They go their separate ways. This one's called WMD. I think it's fairly self-evident, I think. 1. A mother searches through dust, in her hands held tight. A small sweater, one button missing. 2. Soldiers, weary of death, play cards, use buttons for money. 3. A child's hand pulled from rubble, clutching a button. Light from my grandmother's bedroom window. It was a day warm with the heart of a young woman, yet death was all around her. Gray skin, pale eyes, her head unable to right itself, nor silence the voices of the orphan dreams that followed her to this place. Our names to her now alien, as this August sun reaches delicate through the glass to run its fingers through her hair. I have one more it's fairly lengthy. I'm not sure what to do with it yet, so I'll read it, and people either start nodding off or they'll say, or whatever. So it's called Having Coffee with Nostradamus and His Mayan Girlfriend at an All-Night Cafe. I'm going to read even though I don't like doing it, I'm going to read the numbers just so you know there's pauses in there. And as near as I can figure it out for myself, it's almost like each one is a snapshot. Only even though I'm reading it, it takes some time to read it, you have to envision the snapshot happening quickly, almost like jump cuts in film. There's an epigram with this one too. What you do not bring forth will destroy you. It's the Gospel of Thomas. 1. An empty landscape, void of dimension, to which we have come, bone-weary. Soulless moment, balancing language on extended fingers in the smoke-filled air. Music fades into the wallpaper. Words dissolve in the light. The moon hovers, anxious, a yellow eye, dim in discolored glass. Time's breath sighs from the weight of a dying age. Death, the antidote to death. We cannot love what we cannot have. 2. A faint smile crosses his lips. He looks vaguely into the distance. She studies her appointment book, shakes her head, says there is no time like the future. 3. Muffled voices loiter in the air, blank faces, those who won't forget us, those we will never remember. 4. Dim incandescence, flickering. One hand holds a cigarette, the other a blue lighter. She smiles, inhales. The end of it lingers like a fuse. 5. With weary eyes, we acknowledge our reflection. The road outside, the lack of direction. Stuck on purpose. In early morning fog, left to wonder whether we are mortal or merely gods overcome with fear. 6. He sets down his cup without looking up, speaks softly. I don't know what you are thinking, but I know what you want. Then softer still, salvation is the belief you are someone worth loving. 7. The tides erase the barrier between loss and forgetting. So much of human history, the aftermath of catastrophe. We look for answers in the smallest of things, the obsession to overcome all that is, to engineer an element that will split infinity. 8. They move to leave. He picks up the check. She closes her book of missing dates. 9. Dawn rises over the desert, an eternal early morning. Some will kneel, others shake their heads. Still others proudly raise their eyes, shout their prayers to the sky, the louder to overcome all other truths. And at this moment, the stars fall silently into the water, one by one, until at last we are free to love one another. Thank you.
You selling it? What's the cost now? $9.95. Gary's selling it. Anthology of 4 poets. It all went to GRCC at the same time. We had a raucous bunch back then. I nearly was kicked out of school, so was Frank Salamoni. We published poems that had and stories that had filthy language in them. And it was my first experience of fighting for freedom of speech. I had professors that stood up for us. And by the time I left here to go to U of M, I already knew what it was like to defend your writing against religious bigots, I guess would be the way I'd put it. That's what it came right down to. And Gary came after, along with Dave Montgomery, who is a great writer of prose poems and short sketches that unfortunately isn't with us anymore. But there were the four of us. We felt like the four horsemen of the apocalypse in some ways, and enjoyed every minute of it as far as that goes. And it's a great anthology of our work from past and present. The one thing I would like to do before I introduce Barb, this thing is on your thing here. I have to have these filled out so that we can get, this is for the Michigan Council of Arts and Cultural Affairs. They need a take on what people thought of the presentations and the rest of that, and I need a take on how many people were here. This is part of the requirement for the grant. And so the bottom line here is it's not so much whether people like what they hear or not like what they hear, but that we did the reporting. That's your bottom line as far as that goes. And it also gives me a take on things. The bottom line when we talk about this is when these are filled out, we're going to get the final portion of the grant. But more importantly, I think it sets up a pattern so that after I'm retired, if somebody else wants to have a show like this down the road here at the college, we have a track record of being responsible. I hope you're hearing me on this one. We want to make sure that we have used the money that the state has granted us for this thing in a responsible and thoughtful way. So it's important that this be done. And I've got some little, somewhere around here, pencils if you need them. We'll fill those out afterwards if you'll please help me on this one. Barb Saunier. What do I say about Barb? One of my dear friends from years and years here at the college, I like to think of her as the razor, and I know she's heard that many times and likes to dispute the fact. Barb is one who has one of the most sharp minds of anyone I've ever met. That's the simplest way I would put it. She's tough, and she's one that does not mince her words. Beyond that business, a poet that I have watched, sometimes she's hidden her work, I think, or maybe not, maybe she just hasn't shared it, but with everybody, but one that I have great fondness for, both her writing and her personal qualities. Go ahead, Barb.
Oh, there may have been a time when my mind was anywhere near that sharp, but dead weight never means more than when the legs snap. A winch and chain drag the body of the gelding onto the renderer's truck, where the fulcrum bulk of cattle and maybe another horse or two are more than his flightless bones can scale. The snap stops the last harmonic motion in those sprung legs, and gravity takes its last tug. Whatever his triumphs were or none, he leaves in a rank cortege of flies, reckoned less than the price of meat. In the crucible of the rendering plant, resurrection stews. The fat boils out like the stone at the cave door rolling away. Everything but the knicker, they say, cooks down to fertilizer, food for dogs. Till what remains is that infamous glue, a recipe old as hair. If wood speaks in the tongues of angels, it's the glue that gives it voice, his everything and the knicker too. From August shade comes his marriage with spruce, maple, ebony, consummated in the seams of a violin, a double bass. From the wisdom of rosin, his own tale finds its rhythm and swing with the bow, its curve and recurve in the F-holes of the soundboard. He flexes his pole in the scroll and pegs for his love of trees. In the genius of glue, he treads the meadows and plains again. He fills his lungs with the harmonics of wood. The trout looks up and rises for the fly. The lark ascends. and under the musician's hand, his hoof falls in spiccato. Amplify him, amplify him. There was a time early in my career when we had 2 telephones in the English department. One was in the office for the secretary and one was in the lounge. And we also, bless her heart, had a dear elderly lady teaching here who had a penchant for perfume. And if you had occasion to use the telephone after she had used the telephone, you went around with her aroma on you all day long. And I was reminded of that one day watching students in the hall, much more recently, with their cell phones. Dozens of them lined up on the floor in the hallway, not one of them talking to each other, but everybody talking on a phone that they didn't share with anybody. And I thought, well, there is a passage of something nostalgic. Some of you won't even won't recognize the technology here, but the others of us will have a little moment of nostalgia. Phone booth. In place of lovers' folded, penciled notes stowed where birch trunks converged, our fingers pressed coins into the shallow mouth of the dime slot, spiking the dial tone, an invitation answered in that small precinct by the flutter of the fickle dial making its rounds. Clans of hands and at least as many lips recalled those rounds here, smudging years of coughs and stagnant smoke that filtered down to solids underfoot. Grit from shoes mingled with gum wrappers and pills culled from sweaters. Vapor from hot tips, hot dates, hot breaking news, cooled and faded address numbers amid the grocery orders, ticket stubs, curds pared from under our nails, and the shriveled membranes of our lies. These tokens and love's carved hearts recalled us, the fairless, tardy, earnest, timid, lost, all joined our lips and hands here. And sometimes on the handset, someone's hand warmth mulled, a rendezvous just missed. And more against an ear, along the jaw, sometimes the scent of some unmet lover nuzzled, sometimes all day. And while we're on the subject of sex, I ripped off this idea from a student. I'm not proud of that, but it was too good an idea to let go. DP, if you're out there, I credit you. I won't betray who you are in case this isn't something you want people to know. But you remember practicing kissing, right? The kissing post. After the school bus flashes her red to the curb, her mother's list tells her, start supper, run a load of laundry. Upstairs, water heats for potatoes, while in the basement, flannels and twills collapse into piles of cotton and permanent press. She is already 15. If basketball and babysitting scuff the polish off her bitten nails, thoughts of her poster boy husk her, he of the cocked shoulder and the fixed gaze, who speaks her name during study hall so only she hears. As the washtub fills, a load-bearing post beckons from the dance floor. What it lacks of her bed pillows, you baby. It stirs with the hello there of height and something pelvic. Her chambray eyes close. While the clothes take on water, one hand traces the dimpled knot at the nape of the clothesline, and the fingers of her other hand tease the pull chain of the bare light bulb, tugging some privacy on. Shirts and slacks tangle in a figment of breasts and thighs. The lift of her chin beguiles her, yeah, to the exploration of hip, the post's ingrained memory of looking good. Now, how the agitator in the washtub chafes those seams when her suitor leans to scoop her close, and steam from the boil upstairs rattles the pot lid. Their breath rises and lips part barely. Her fingernails grow tapered and long. We talked a little bit today in the panel that I served on about the origins of our work. This is a poem that in a lot of ways is just contrived. I heard the title on NPR, you may have heard it, The Fear of Sleep, and I didn't get a chance to hear the episode, I suppose it was This American Life, where they talked about the fear of sleep, but I thought that is a title that needs some attention. And the poem, the lines just accumulated as I paged through a catalog. The fear of sleep. It's the slough of skin that keeps you awake, all that accumulates in the cobwebs that form in the corners when you're not looking. Saliva pools in your throat without the trigger of food, losing its way and wanting to start over. In your gut, fauna proliferate. Hair and fingernails split and fade. If it were only the consequence of not hearing the alarm or of letting the coffee maker bake dry, any jury of austere cats might acquit you of falling asleep. The priest, hearing such confession, might assign you 15,800 respirations a day instead of the usual penance counting sheep. But coral can't help veining vessels immersed in rest, nor can rust resist to claim threads and joints fallen still. Sandbags levy against somnolence, stemming the encroachment of vine into lattice, of fear into vitals. No slurry of volcanic ash will overtake your thighs. Every night the moon retreats from your bed 4 1,000ths of an inch. If you fall asleep, what's to check the return of tail and gills? What's to keep gravity from swapping temperaments with fire? Roadkill. Bloated raccoons grimace where their wits martyred them, at the side of the road where their grip on the tree of life relaxed mid-shinny. Around the shoulders of a weedy cross, a sun-bleached plastic wreath like the slung arm of a drunk, a name in paint slurred by weather and winter's road salt. Where the road tees, a car turns neither left nor right, but bumpers over the grill into the ditch. At the intersection where a stop sign should have been priest enough, along the stretch of highway where some driver expects not one revelation. Is this guidepost where shades of the dead come seeking the comforts of a worn teddy bear, or snapshots like visions of saints and virgins in Ziploc bags? Is this scaffold where they pawn the tennis racket and the American flags so they can return one day to claim their faded effects? On the verge, the 6 teats of a possum balloon from her marsupial pouch, her young the size of peanuts riding nipples and rot gas up. Crisp witness to the steel-belted rumble of long-distance haulers and garbage trucks. Who bothers to make pilgrimage to these shrines? Doe, whose fawn straddles the double yellow line to steep in miraculous cures. Squirrel, who from his own skid mark raises the lit candle of his tail. Goldfinch, who leaves the yellow feather that says, I too was here. I'm not immune to the temptation of having dominion over the creatures I don't like that, but I'm not immune. And here's a possum that called me on it. Possum. Against the far wall of the shed, this skulk-footed lurker recoils behind pallets, angling for corners I think are mine. In my vitals, digestion stops. With 322 slugs keen for their mark, I kneel, one quiet finger staking my claim to all I think I own. But when the gun's moving parts balk, belief backfires. My claim turns to lead for want of a shot, and I retreat through the hole in the wall by which I came. Kim mentioned in her poem the economic circumstances that produced husks, the foreclosures, the lost jobs, all that. This is my foreclosure poem. There are 8 parts. It's almost entirely true. There's only 2 or 3 lines of fabrication in it, and they're darn close enough. Foreclosure 1. The sun studies the far wall from the kitchen window. Already he has forgotten the blocky real estate of the refrigerator for the copper tubing that remains, the electrical outlet with its rag of cobweb, but no plug, no hum. He brushes past where the cat saved up kibble and other bounty under the absent stove. 2 keys, 1 book of stamps, the checkbook register, a hearing aid, and 4 unopened clips of candy Pez. All now alight in the empty room, as though in passing his hip has dialed up the flame. 2. Make offer. Baskets, jigsaw puzzles and board games, placemats, tablecloth with matching napkins, 2 potted philodendron baskets, clothes hangers bundled with masking tape, children's books from ducklings to dinosaurs, National Geographic, Reader's Digest, bubble wrap, baskets, plastic shovel and pail, pedal car, teapot shaped like English cottage, teapot shaped like pineapple, baskets, free. 3. Screwed to the door frame, a clipboard the size of a postcard where drop-ins left notes. Sorry, we missed you. We owe you lunch. We'll stop back later. D and S. The pencil hangs from a knotted string, lead broken, its eraser dry as a nut. 4. On the open porch, an indifferent breeze nudges the slatted swing on its way through. Matching blue shutters and window boxes hang on while they can, but the swing, hoof clops from an Amish buggy passing rap against clapboard, their knock unanswered by a terry cloth robe and Sunday morning paper, a cigarette at dusk. 5. Jostled into a cardboard box, Iris dug from along the walk as some kind of remedy, cannot find their list of things to do. First the root, and then the rain. Still in the box at the corner of the garage, they give up trying to become an Easter hat. 6. The bad news. Limb fall from old maples, spindles sod with a shrug after the good fight. The good news, limb fall welcomes sun to grass. Too much of a good thing, maybe. Grass claims the collateral in wood's exposed grain. Grass claims cracks in asphalt, claims raspberry canes, claims compost pile, fire pit, Adirondack chair. Grass claims lawn and goes to seed. 7. The neighbor's drive seems twice as long with nowhere to carry gossip from the post office. Overdue news backs up and cools. Fix-it hands find their place repossessed. 8. The sun curls into the corner by the back door like the dog they tried to give away, who would not dun them for what it cost her navigating the road's shoulder back to this stoop. And if no one lets her in today, perhaps tomorrow, or the day after. We need something a little lighter. This is a performance piece. I need to steel myself. Wash day in the lanes, Limerick, 1938. Clothes dry, especially when the day is fine. Who can stop clothes drying? And thanks be to Jesus for that too, so she would say. Over the heat of a good turf fire, clothes go into the washtub dirty with the sweat and the grime of the mill and the docks. And sure, if they don't come out, if not clean, at least wet. And which is more than they were when they went in. And isn't that a miracle? She winks. Praise be. Yet don't they come out clean as well, more often than not? And each wash day that rain abates, it's almost worth the lie in the washboard to cast away the kinks from her back and raising up her arms to the clothesline, zigging and zagging over the back courtyard, pegging on the aprons and towels like wash-worn notes to a stave, and watching them take flight like kites, like prayers. Every zephyr the good Lord sends laundry, ruffles, stocking, and jumper alike, which in their turn sift the coal smut from the air and brighten the sun on the other side. And if the clothes fade, sure, it's only as the colors take their place and the greater goings on, taken up, wouldn't she say, like the souls of those she lights candles for. And with the sun's good tidings washing down upon her face as on the best of them, its neighbors worse off than herself she thinks of, Mrs. Murdoch with not a tooth to tear her bread, and young Ginny Doyle without an onion to flavor the broth. And over the way there's them as has no courtyard for drying the nightshirts and the bloomers, but only an alley and a pole 2 floors above the scurvy lane. So it's tea she would offer when she has a minute, when Ginny Doyle reads for her the letters that come, and Mrs. O'Cullen there suckling any woman's babe as needs the favor. And listening as they do to Mrs. Murdoch's radio propped on the sill just so for one and all. It's tea she would offer and a bit of consideration for their efforts, as well an act of contrition for her taken pleasures in matters of this life. So for all the wages that himself drops at that murky pub on his way between the cement works and his own hearth, till she's glad enough when the meek inherit no more than the rent, for all she's herself bunioned and arthritic and pegged like a house dressed to the line in these lanes behind the quay, isn't it purely a comfort to her to know there's a thing she can look forward to, and that is this, thanks be, clothes dry. I don't own a dryer. I've never owned a dryer. I just use the line. This time of year, I've got clothes hanging in a rack in the living room. So if I know you're coming, I'll take the underwear off. I don't have babies, but a lot of people I know do, and they seem pretty taken with the whole business. There's a ritual, apparently, that you all go through very early on. And my cousin did the same with her son, but she missed a couple of details. This is for my cousin Phyllis. I have to get rid of the Irish thing is still in my tongue. My boy with legs. I don't think to count his legs in that first unswaddled tally, when fingers and toes tie 10 to 10, and the delicate scrolls of each ear of 2 shape my hand with a mother's thanksgiving. As he toddles from diapers into piano lessons and Little League, his steps multiply past notation, filling the staves of my life with melody, with chords. His hits, his errors, his runs batted in, I'm sure I know by heart, all of his beats per measure. I've reckoned his birthdays on both hands by the time news sears the neighborhood. Another woman's boy crosses the tracks in a crescendo of red flashing lights. Turning counter to plan, one bicycle wheel loses its baseline, loses its boy, his romp for home, his count of legs. Imagination is a clot in the pulse of my infield, the coda that stops movement like a cramp. But even in arrest, my heart takes inventory and posts the revised score. Blurred freckles in the sandlot like phrased quarter notes make of my heart a cornet. My boy steals third on his 2 legs, and reveille sounds another day of gratitude. That's my boy there on a wonder of legs, 2 legs and counting. This is the poem that made me money. We've gotten used to thinking of Monet and Van Gogh, or Van Gogh, as my cousin the pedant says, Renoir, Degas, we're all, you'd need the money from a small country to buy any one of them anymore, but it wasn't always the case. And in the Impressionist exhibition of 1881, Gauguin had a piece that the public and the critics scorned. It was a nude that did not reveal the classic beauty that people wanted in their nudes. But this is for any of us women here who no longer have the profile we might once have had. My body, this aging cheese. A persona poem, as Kim taught you about. My body, this aging cheese, affronts them like a mold, as though beneath my bird rind I were not still some other woman's cream-skinned daughter tending to her torn petticoat. This curdled lap, these clotted breasts, slough their tuts and rancid glances. If our intent had been a pose, I'd have sat this unmade bed like a throne. Instead, I ripen and mend, and if they miss the grace even I can see of thimble needling thread from one stitch to the next, they miss too that flavors in the fat, and that in full time, like sin generations removed from the original, they will lick me all over for the salt. Thank you.
Okay, so if you can fill out those forms, and especially you students, I remember when I was a student, when you see all kinds of free food up there, grab it. When I was at Michigan as a undergrad, basically we would go to these things, and I think half of it was to go to see the poems or whatever people were doing, and the other half was to fill your pockets with as much food as possible. I'm not saying do that, but on the other hand, there it is. Other than that, if you can bring the ones that you have up here, or maybe I'll put a chair out.